Okay, voila, Chair.
Thank you, Sophie.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Well, welcome to the Children and Young People's Scrutiny meeting on the 9th of November. Do we have any substitutes nominated for this meeting?
I have not been sent any substitutes or apologies tonight, Chair.
Good, thank you. And members' interests, I need to remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or other interests they might have in relation to the items on this evening's agenda. You can do that now or if and when it comes up for people. Anything particular at this point in time?
Chair, can I just say, can I just raise
Yes.
as a personal one that as an adoptive parent, I have an interest in, general interest in item 5.
One would hope that you did have, Diana, but thank you for letting us know. Good, thank you. If there are any more, just shout out when the time is appropriate. As far as the public is concerned, we've gone live, so it's not recommended the public be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of the items on this agenda. So welcome everybody who has chosen to join us. I hope you find it informative and useful. Going on, item 4, the minutes of the meeting held on the 12th of October. You will have all received these. Have you got anything that you would like to say in terms of their accuracy or whatever? Or can we accept those minutes of the meeting? Can't see anybody who's concerned about that, so I will assume we're all okay and those will be signed as and when appropriate. Let's get straight on to the 2 substantive items on the agenda. This is a report from One Adoption West Yorkshire. It's their annual report, who look after the adoption side of things in Calderdale, along with a chunk of West Yorkshire as well, I believe. I think we've got Rhiannon Banyan, who is going to do Bynum.
Mm-hmm.
Did I get it right?
You did, Bynum.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can
Okay.
you want to give this one on the basis that we've all had a chance to read your very extensive report, but key points and anything you want to add, please.
Great, thank you. Well, as described, we are the regional adoption agency for Calderdale, along with the other 4 local authorities in West Yorkshire. So we provide the adoption services for children and adults in the region. I think probably good to start with the national picture. Nationally, we are seeing numbers of children with an adoption plan falling. At the same time, we're seeing the outcomes from court of a special guardianship order rising. That's not the case in West Yorkshire. In West Yorkshire, our numbers of children requiring an adoption plan have remained stable, which is in sharp contrast to the rest of the country. So whereas other agencies are rolling back a bit on their recruitment of prospective adopters, we are not. We are absolutely working very hard to try and get as many people as possible to consider adopting our children who have a plan of adoption. The other national picture things, I think, is that the Adoption Support Fund, which is a large fund of money from central government that is available to support therapeutic interventions for children and families who are adopted on special guardianship orders, has been agreed until 2025, which is really good news for us. We make extremely good use of the Adoption Support Fund and draw down a lot of money every year for our local families.
Good news.
Yeah. Also, the National Adoption Strategic Group has been given additional funding to continue. Sarah Johal, who used to be our head of service, is the lead for that. So that brings other regional adoption agencies from across the country together to think about how we can improve adoption practice, thinking about adopter recruitment, but also how we can improve matching between children and adopters, and the provision of adoption support as well. So there's a lot of work currently going on within that national group that we are drawing down from as well and feeding into. Within One Adoption at present, since Sarah moved on to the national team, we have several interim appointments within the service, and particularly within the senior management team. So our head of service is currently interim, Michelle Rawlings. I'm interim as service delivery manager for recruitment and assessment, and my colleague Nicola Steele is interim as service delivery manager for family findings. So we are in consultation with our management board around the next steps for making those positions permanent and whether those go out to external recruitment or not. So we're hoping as soon as possible to be able to get some permanent posts in our senior leadership team. We've also seen quite a lot of changes of staff within our service, as mostly as people have retired. Some people have managed to get promotions, which is fantastic, but that's caused us some instability this year with having to then recruit new staff. But we've now recruited to most of our vacancies, so we're feeling in a much better position than we have been through the year. Despite that, our feedback from our staff surveys remains very positive. People enjoy working for One Adoption West Yorkshire. Our sickness levels are low in relation to other posts in children's social care. So our staff retention overall, we're hopeful, will continue to be fairly good. We have a multidisciplinary team. There's been some new recruitment of that. So that's a team which is partially funded by local authorities, partially by health, which brings together clinical psychologists, speech therapy, occupational therapy, and therapeutic social work together to assess and provide for the needs of children with an adoption plan. It's a very successful service. We've had fantastic feedback from our adopters in particular about the impact that they've had in the early planning, but also post-placement, for helping keep some stability in our adoptive families. So we're really lucky to have that in our region. Not every regional adoption agency has a multidisciplinary team. We also work very closely with our virtual schools across the region. So Calderdale Virtual School, along with the other 4 local authorities, we come together and meet 4 times a year to look at the educational needs of our adopted children and focus on key issues, particularly at the moment. We're seeing lots of issues around higher anxiety in children and children feeling unable to go to school, for instance. So working together with the virtual schools is really helpful for us to be able to communicate with a large group of schools about what our children's needs are and how they can be met. Okay. To come on to the recruitment of adopters, we have, in the last financial year, 21-22, we recruited 112 adoptive families, which is very similar to our recruitment levels last year, which I'm really pleased about given the staffing turnover that we've had, that we've managed to keep up our numbers and the number of families that we're approving. We've matched 106 of those families with children, and 105 of those were matched with children from the West Yorkshire region. So if you adopt with One Adoption, you'll usually be adopting a child from our region, and that's fantastic because we want to keep our children, as local as possible, mainly so that we can support them. We've got lots of wonderful support on offer that we want to engage them in, but also so that we can promote contact as well. And particularly, one of our focuses is to think about direct contact, particularly with siblings and other extended family members, where that is safe and right to do so. So keeping children local is a real focus of us. So that's quite good news. Of the 206 individuals that were approved in those 112 households, 10% were from a Black and minority ethnic background. That's something we want to increase. Our children are diverse, although within Calderdale, 100% of the children with an adoption plan last year and the year before have been white British. But in terms of our other local authorities, we do need to increase the diversity of our adopters coming forward. We have increased the number of households that will consider sibling groups, which again we are very pleased about, because that is a high need for us. We have many children needing to be placed alongside brother or sister or two. So we desperately need families who can consider adopting more than one child. That is becoming more of a challenge, particularly with the cost of living crisis at the moment. Adopters are really thinking twice about whether they can take on more than one child at once. So that is really having an impact on us. We have 19 households out of those approved that were open to consider a child for early permanence. So this is where a child is placed with the prospective adopters on a fostering basis whilst the care proceedings and decision making is ongoing. We only do that where there's a very high likelihood that adoption is going to ultimately be the plan for that child. And what it means then is that the child doesn't have to have another move, that they then remain with the carers that they've been placed with to be adopted. So it's, you know, it is a great thing for children. We really want to increase our use of early permanence in the region. We have low numbers in West Yorkshire compared to some of our statistical neighbours. And we've been successful in drawing down some money from the national strategic team to focus on improving our use of early permanence. So we've got a post in place now where we are exploring what the challenges might be for us in our area and what we can do to increase that. So that's ongoing. Adoption approvals are in two stages. So we have a stage one where we will do initial checks. So a lot of your statutory checks on adopters, your medicals, your DBSs and things like that are done in stage one. If everything goes well in that stage, they move on to stage two, and that's where we do the larger home study assessment of families and go into far more detail about what they have to offer children and what support they might need. So of the 139 families who ended stage one in 21-22, the average time in stage one was 4 months. 34% were completed within 2 months, which is our timescale. A big factor that has impacted on that has been a shortage of our adoption advisors. Our adoption advisors do a lot of the stage one work with around the checks for families. We had several who moved on to other posts at once, so we had a bit of challenge there, but we're now fully staffed with adoption advisors and our timescales are already improving again. But another more significant factor is getting GP medicals. So we have to do those medicals and get those back and get our medical advice within stage one. Families are finding it very difficult to get a GP appointment and report in good time. So that's really impacting on our timescales in stage one. Of the 112 adoptive families who ended stage two in 21-22, the average time in stage two was 4 months, which is on target with what we should be doing and what we're expected to do. And that's an improvement on last year. 79% of them were completed within the 4-month timescale. At the end of the year, there were 118 families in the process who are not yet approved. 65 of those were in stage one, 38 were in stage two, and there were 15 families on hold. So we've got a good number coming through. And I know at the moment in stage one, we've got 95 families, which is the highest I think we've ever had at that stage of the process. So that bodes well for the numbers of families we've got coming through, hopefully. Not all of those will progress, but many will. Thinking about the first half of this year, we had 87 households who made a formal application to begin the adoption process. That's a massive 62% increase from the same period in the previous year. So again, indicates that we've got a good strong number of adopters coming through. However, at the moment, the amount in stage two is fairly consistent at 34. We expect that to rise. We approved 44 adoptive families which is less than this time last year, but we do have a great many approvals booked onto panels. So I'm confident of us achieving similar numbers this year. If you want to know about conversion rates, this is this indicates the amount of people who come to an information event to learn more about adoption who actually go on then to be approved. As of the 30th of September, our conversion rate in the 12 months was 57%. And the conversion rate within 24 months was 62%. That indicates that, you know, many of our adopters do take a bit longer to move through the process for many reasons. We have many families going on hold during the process. And they can go on hold for up to 6 months at their choice in order to make sure that they're absolutely ready to take an adopted child. Moving on to the Calderdale children with an adoption plan. So during the year 21-22, there were 15 Calderdale children who had a plan ratified by the agency decision maker that they should be placed for adoption. Of those, 9 were female, 6 were male, and 100% were from white British backgrounds. In terms of sibling relationships, as a principle, we will always look to place siblings together where that is absolutely the right plan for them. But sometimes due to the individual needs of those children, that is not felt to be the right plan. So social workers will do a sibling assessment to consider that, but it will not always be recommended. The numbers of children requiring placement in a sibling group at the end of the year was 16. But that included children already with a match or already placed. That data includes all those children. Of the 5 children who were placed from that cohort during 21-22, 3 were placed apart from their siblings and 2 siblings were placed together. But that did reflect the care planning for each child after the assessments were done. So we've not had to separate siblings where we did not feel that that was the right thing to do. So for children with an adoption plan, at the end of March 2022, there were 18 children who had a plan for adoption in Calderdale who were not currently placed. Many of those have been placed since. 6 of those were under 2, 9 were between 2 and 4 years of age, and 3 were 5 or older. For the children who had a plan, there were 11 girls and 7 boys. Again, none of those were from BAME backgrounds. They were all white British, and there were 9 children who were part of the sibling group. The plans for those children are actively reviewed. There's very clear monitoring and tracking systems with Calderdale to understand the range of family finding activity that's going on and to keep track of whether adoption remains the right plan for those children. The number of placement orders made over the year remained the same, much as the previous year. The timeliness, so we have scorecards that we are compared against other RAAs nationally in terms of how we're doing with timeliness. The A1 indicator measures the time between when a child enters care and them moving in with their adoptive family. And the indicator is 426 days. So in Calderdale, the indicator was 540. However, when that's adjusted for children who are with foster carers or on EPP, where their timescales can be quite skewed by that, the indicator came down to 456 days, which is much better. The A2 indicator indicates the time between getting a placement order, which is authority from the court to place a child for adoption, and the child being matched with prospective adopters. The national indicator is 121 days, and the indicator for Calderdale children was 285 days, which is above the national indicator. Now, it usually is, and it is for most RAAs. It's a very difficult target to hit. Also, one of the things I think is important to say is that within One Adoption and within Calderdale as a local authority, we don't shy away from trying to find placements for children who are deemed harder to place. So we are family finding for older children. We're family finding for children with, significant complex health issues. When we persevere, we don't give up unless it's actually come to the point where we think this is no longer in the child's interest for us to be continuing to do this. We don't give up just because we didn't get family the first few times. That does impact on our timeliness, and it means that our scorecards don't always look fantastic, but our outcomes for children, I think, are pretty good. We're generally successful. There's not many children we have to revert the plan in order to say, actually we didn't manage to find them a family. Okay, just wanted to say a bit about adoption support, because another big role of One Adoption is supporting those families throughout their lifetime, really, but particularly through to the children reaching the age of 21. At the end of March, there were 103 Calderdale families who had an allocated worker from the Adoption Support Service. And they all have an active adoption support plan, and many are in receipt of or awaiting therapeutic support from the Adoption Support Fund. In that year also, there were 90 successful applications to the Adoption Support Fund in respect of Calderdale children, and we drew down £370,332 worth of funding for therapeutic support for those families. There were 23 families from Calderdale awaiting allocation at the end of March. Allocation has been, and the waiting time for that has been a real pressure for us, and our feedback from our families is that's really difficult for them to manage. We have had a reconfiguration of our adoption support service so that no families will be sat on a waiting list with no input from January. We have an early intervention team who will be able to do the quick wins in terms of getting out to see families quickly, get an understanding of where we can put things in place quite quickly. For those families that need a bit more beyond that, they will be held within a team and visited again very quickly, and those services put in over time. And for those families with the most severe need, they then will have an allocated social worker. So not every family will have an allocated social worker, but not every family needs that. As long as they're getting that quick response and those services put in place quickly, we're hoping that will make a big difference to the experience of our families. We also facilitate letterbox arrangements. So this is where there's a communication sent between adoptive families and birth families. And there are currently 207 letterbox plans that are facilitated for Calderdale children and young people by One Adoption, with 322 exchanges received and 203 sent out between April and March 2022. We also made 167 referrals to Post-Adoption Centre UK for adult adoptees and birth parents and relatives. So we commission Post-Adoption Centre to deliver those services for adults who want to come back and access their records or have support around reunification, or for birth parents that need additional support and counselling, perhaps around managing contacts, etc. Again, in that year, we had 330 access to records requests, 20 of which related to accessing Calderdale records. We also have peer mentors. We have a contract with Adoption UK to provide adopters who can act as peer mentors to other adopters going through the process, so that they've got that hand-holding from someone who's been there and done that. We have 20 active peer mentors across the region, 2 of whom are in Calderdale. And throughout the year, we had 5 Calderdale families who accessed one-to-one support and 2 families accessing online group support from the peer mentors. So there's a lot of adoption support work going on as well for Calderdale families. Okay, I think that covers most things, unless anyone's got any questions.
Yes, I think there might be 1 or 2, but thank you for that. A very detailed report, which much appreciated, and clearly there's lots of good stuff going on. And I think we have to commend your organisation yourself for doing just that. Clearly, as a Scrutiny organisation, we want to home in on some of the areas which can develop and improve on that. So we regard ourselves very much as critical friends as opposed to somebody just trying to catch people out. But I think it would be appropriate to ask some questions in some areas. I've already seen Dinah, you're in the dark there, aren't you? I can't recognise your face there. Councillor Tremaine, you've got your hand up. Would you like to speak?
Yeah, sorry, I can't get the lighting right in here. I need to get an extra light or something. So. Yeah, thank you. There was loads of detail in there, and it was really good to have that extra input at the end about the adoption support and what's going on there, just because I know how important that is and how absolutely crucial it is that it's timely. I won't ask all my questions. I might just ask a couple and see who else asks things. Just right at the start, it's really interesting the point you raised around the national fall in children with an adoption plan and how that's not the case in West Yorkshire. And I wondered if you could shed any light on that, because it's interesting.
It is very interesting. I mean, it's difficult to quantify. We haven't seen a dramatic increase in Calderdale per se, but some of our other local authorities have. So particularly we've had high numbers of children from Bradford and Wakefield, and we know there's a lot of social deprivation within those areas, and the impact of austerity, of COVID, of cost of living crisis has really impacted those families. And plus these are councils that have seen some of the biggest percentage cuts in their funding as well. So the ability to offer those wraparound services to families around things that we know are important to prevent children coming into care, like domestic violence services and drug and alcohol services and mental health services. So I do wonder if that's had a big impact on the number of children coming into care here, and therefore knock-on effect is that there'll be a high number of children with an adoption plan. But I mean, I don't know for certain what that cause is. Yeah.
Can I ask another one, Ashley? Is that okay?
Yes, yeah.
Well, I'm just trying to choose which one. I was just interested to see about the multidisciplinary team and also the work with the virtual school heads and across the region. And also I'm thinking again about that impact of funding and what local authorities have available, and perhaps sometimes children who've been adopted, I'm not saying they fall off the radar a little bit, but it can sometimes be a little bit harder to kind of access some of that support, possibly, potentially. And I just wondered kind of how easy it is to put that in place and make sure that that's working really effectively right across the region, and obviously particularly in Calderdale, when local authorities are really facing struggles with recruitment and funding, obviously, for things.
Yeah. Well, with regards to education, we have, as well as our work with the virtual schools, we also have within our multidisciplinary team a specialist education worker as well, who's a former teacher who full-time works for us, focusing on the educational needs of looked after children. She leads on the liaison with the virtual schools, and she also spends a lot of time going into schools, talking to them about adopted children's needs in particular, and making sure that schools understand the developmental trauma that often comes with adopted children, and that it's not all sunshine and rainbows, I guess, as some people can think adoption will be. She also has an advice line that adopters can ring that's open for a number of hours every day. And she will answer that or get back to people who've got queries about education. We also we have a newsletter that goes out regularly to our families, and within that we always highlight that time of year, particularly in October, when they need to notify schools, so that children are recorded as previously looked after and eligible for the Pupil Premium Plus funding. So we try to go out wider to all of our families, not just those that are coming to us saying we're struggling. And we have a number of support groups that run across the region. And no matter what the topic of that support group, you can guarantee within 5 minutes it'll return to school, because this is a really big issue for many of our adopters. With regards to other support, as I said, we're lucky to have the MDT, but we also have a fantastic business support team who really support us around accessing the Adoption Support Fund. The reason we're able to draw down so much money is partly due to the hard work of all the social workers doing the assessments and making the recommendations and sourcing the providers. But really, our business support are fantastic in managing that, the portal that we have to fill in all that information on, managing all of the invoicing that comes with that, all of the admin that comes with drawing down all of that money. But as a result, we're providing a lot of therapeutic support. So where adopted children, I think, benefit more than children who aren't adopted is access to that fund, and we make really good use of it.
Brilliant, thank you. I'll hand over to everyone else.
Thank you. I've got Dot and Danielle. So Dot came, I noticed first. Councillor Foster, you'd like to ask a question?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation and the documents today. They've been really interesting to read. Just got a couple of points. I might sort of do a couple and then come back later, like I don't know.
The trend is
children with SEND are not included routinely alongside BAME and gender and so on. When you're looking at your stats, they usually say of these, so many were BAME and so many were girls, so many were boys. Why do you not include? Is there a reason that you do not include children with SEND at that point? And is that something that you could look at in the future? So just so that it's clearer on the report how many children actually do have additional needs that you are looking to place for adoption.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it is really tricky. I mean, in terms of SEND, that's often not identified until a child is of school age, and many of the children that we're dealing with and placing are not of school age, so they may go on to develop SEND needs, but that's not necessarily identified at the time that we're drawing our data. Sorry, that's my phone ringing. In terms of children's developmental needs, this is quite tricky. So we do identify where children have a disability, but that's only where it's a diagnosed disability, and we record that on our system. Many of our children have undiagnosed needs, but they do have additional needs. Our approach is generally every adopted child comes with additional needs. You know, there is no straightforward adopted child. You know, by the very virtue of being adopted, you know, you have probably experienced trauma in utero, you have had, you know, at least one separation, probably more, from significant caregivers. That is, we know that impacts on children's physiological and neurological development, and they're likely to have difficulties later down the line. So one could argue that all of our children have additional needs, but in terms of recording that, we are only really able to record that where it's a diagnosed disability.
Okay, thank you. Might I ask another couple of quick ones, please? What is brain-based parenting?
Yeah. So I can talk about this because I deliver this training. So brain-based parenting is a workshop that I deliver regularly for adopters at all stages of the process. And it basically looks at the child development, but particularly brain development in infants from before birth and post-birth, and how that can be impacted by adversity. So how it can be impacted by substance use and anxiety, things to do with pregnancy, how it can be impacted later on through neglect or lots and lots of moves and instability or abuse, and how that might manifest itself. So we look at the science of what happens in the brain, and we look at what that can mean in terms of how a child might present some distressed behaviours. And it's basically having a lens to see that child's distressed behaviour, to understand what's going on underneath. And then we move on to therapeutic parenting. So types of parenting that is best placed to repair that disrupted development within children. So it's a 2-hour therapeutic parenting workshop that the vast majority of our adopters attend. It is optional, but we encourage them all to go along and hear it. And some of them come back time and time again just to rehear it at different stages, because it means more to you It's different when you hear it without a child, when you're in the preparation process and you're thinking about the kind of child you might be matched with, to when you've got a child newly placed, to when they're a teenager. What you take from it will vary.
Thank you. That sounds really interesting, actually.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll leave that now.
So far. Dot,
Yeah, I'll come back for a second bite of the cherry in a bit.
fine,
Thank
but give somebody another bite, as you say. Danielle, Council Durrans. And then I've got Will coming up.
Sorry, Chair, it wouldn't let me unmute. A couple of my points have been raised around the SEND and the ongoing support for adoptive parents around attachment, parenting and therapeutic approaches. One of the questions I had was, and you might have answered this and I might have misunderstood, around pupil premium, do parents have to declare that every October? Because I'm thinking, as children develop their self-identity, and particularly around transitions and big transitions from one school to another, they might not want to know that, or the school to know that they're necessarily adopted, and it might not be an important part of their identity. So how would the school then draw down that pupil premium funding? Is there nothing that could be?
The school can't draw down the funding if they've not been informed that the child was previously looked after. So they do.
So it doesn't follow through.
It does if you remain in the same school. So once the school's been informed, they've been informed, and you won't need to redo that every October. You know, they will just continue to draw down. And hopefully we would expect that when they transfer to secondary, that part of the transition planning would also be sharing that information, and then that school would then continue to draw down. But it's always worth adopters double checking that with the school. If they don't tell the school, it will not be drawn down. The child won't receive pupil premium plus.
I didn't know that, so thank you for that. And then the only other one was, if that's okay, Chair, you said around a limited diverse group of people coming forward to be adopters. I just wondered what you're doing to address that, and whether there is considerations and work going ahead looking at engaging a more diverse group.
Yeah, it's part of our recruitment strategy and our marketing strategy. So we are trying to focus recruitment activity on those communities. So part of that work is alongside the national team. So there is a working group as part of that, looking at how nationally we can appeal to adopters. And during National Adoption Week, there's lots of media that's produced that include diverse families, within them, so that we're presenting that image of adoption as being available to all. More locally, we've done some targeted work. So it was Black History Month last month, so we had quite a burst of activity then, and we did some outdoor advertising, in particular areas where we know there are high populations of Caribbean and African communities, because that's the need that we really have. In West Yorkshire, we're quite sufficient in families from an Asian background, but we really struggle with families from African and Caribbean backgrounds. It's not just about recruiting those families, though. It's also about them being able to meet the needs of the children that we have, because we're not going to usually find an exact cultural or ethnic match for those families. So we are doing work with those families to try and help them to consider what background of child that they could consider. So we have set up a group called TREX, which is trans, racial, ethnic and cultural support. So these are for adopters who have adopted transracially or are considering adopting transracially, to support each other. And we're just about to set up another group for Black and Caribbean adopters within the process as well. So yeah, we've got a number of things going on, but that is our recruitment strategy.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We've got Will Solomon, our young person member. Welcome, Will.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got two quite quick ones. The first one's quite similar to one that Councillor Foster asked. So how much data do you have about kids that identify as part of the LGBT community? I'm assuming, obviously, if you're dealing with a lot of quite young kids, this probably doesn't come up. But as they get older, and especially around what support is given to adopters? And sort of has this come up as a factor when you've, been looking at where to place children or when you're doing assessments later on in their development?
Yeah. So it doesn't often come up at the point that we're placing children, because we don't usually place children over the age of 7. It's very rare, and often, that sometimes there's some things around perhaps more non-binary issues have been identified at that stage. And we would always be sharing that information with prospective adopters and looking at that match and whether those adopters could support that child. We always cover it in assessment with people. So we look at particularly at adolescence and what issues might come up for children, and sexuality is one of them. So we wouldn't be taking forward prospective adopters who had a discriminatory attitude towards LGBTQ plus issues. And it is always explored. We do support older children post-adoption order. So we've got lots of children that we're working with who identify in all sorts of ways. We don't always record that information, and many young people don't want us to, but we do. We are at the moment trying to challenge. We have an issue where we can only record people as male or female on our systems. And the reason that we can only do that in terms of data is because that's what the government set in terms of what they want reported on as well. So our systems have to reflect what the DfE information is as well. So we have been alongside the other RAAs as part of the national work lobbying to have some consideration for that and some changes, because not all of our children will identify as male or female. So we're hoping that we can see some progress on that. So at the moment we have sort of halfway things where we will put next to their name, does not identify as, or non-binary name, or things like that, which is more complicated than it needs to be, really.
Yeah, it would be great to see some national government action around that. And then my final question was, how much sort of information or data do you have kids once they've sort of left your service when they turn 18, of sort of like what they go on to do, and especially whether that's we identify trends or things that are missing, and whether or not that means changing some practices early on?
Yeah. We don't have any aggregate data on that because we're not always in contact with every adopted young person at that stage, or have been since they were adopted at times. But we do have some smaller representative data in that we work closely with PAC UK around supporting young adults. So they have a team group called Adopt Teams, and they also have a group called Bridging the Gap, which works with young people who are beyond 18 and in that kind of transitioning into independence and adulthood. So they, as well as being a support group for each other, they're a focus group for us. So we rely on them very heavily to let us know what's important to them, what is the big impact on their outcomes at the moment, and whether there's anything that we as an agency can do to support that. There's also quite a lot of feedback. So the last adoption barometer from Adoption UK highlighted quite strongly that there were key issues for adopted young people around transition to adulthood, and that this is a time when most families feel that services are falling away and they're not getting that support. So we have built that into our agency strategy this year about how we focus on those needs, and we've got some work going on with our local authorities around the services for care leavers and what elements of those our adopted people might be able to access at that stage.
That's great, thank you.
That's an interesting question. Well, both questions were, Will, thank you for that. The second one, in terms of the care leavers, is there no link between adoption and care leavers part of Calderdale? Because clearly it's a similar relationship, isn't there? And I understand the reasons why you're saying. Is there any link there?
There are initial conversations going on. So yes, we have linked in, but in terms of developing a pathway, we're not there yet. But that's what we would like to do, is to identify a pathway, particularly for those young people who maybe their relationship with their adoptive family have broken down. I think they would be the priority. The local authority are not going to have the resources to be able to offer a leaving care service to every adopted young person. And that technically under the Leaving Care Act, they are not eligible or relevant, but they are qualifying. so they can be entitled to some support and advice. But we're looking at whether we can develop a pathway, particularly for those more vulnerable young people whose relationships with their adoptive families are broken down and they have very little support.
Good, yeah, thank you for that. A couple of other names coming up. Councillor Tremaine, you're back on the scene here. And then I've got Dot and Helen coming up.
Apologies, I just thought I'd get another quick one in there. Just one really quick point was there's an appendix mentioned around the voice of young children and young people, and I couldn't find it. It was on page 33, and I was just interested because that's always good to hear if it's there. But if it's not, don't worry. It'll have got lost somewhere in translation probably.
It will be an appendix to the annual report, and I sent the annual report, but I guess not that appendix. Sorry.
Don't worry. One of the questions I just thought of was just around GPs and that issue around GP medicals and reports and things. I mean, that's obviously really hard to address. Is it getting easier? Is it getting harder? I mean, obviously, trying to get an appointment at the doctor's is often quite a challenge any time. So I guess it's not getting easier.
It's a bit of both, really. So during the pandemic, it was incredibly difficult. And we took advantage of some of the special arrangements the government made in terms of the regulations to give us some flexibility in bringing people through in timescales and not necessarily having face-to-face medicals, but having virtual medicals. Since then, we have seen an improvement in the general sort of GPs being able to offer appointments within better timescales than they were, but they're still not ideal for us within our 2 months timescale of getting them through stage 1. What we have begun to see, though, is for some GPs, not all, but some have refused to provide a report without being paid up front, and that's really problematic for us because we don't pay them. They send us the bill and we send it to the CCG and they get refunded. There's many GPs that have set their own rates as well, so which the CCG will pay something like £74.16 or something, I think it is, to GPs, and they might set the cost at £150. So the prospective adopters are having to make up the difference there. And if you're an adopter on a low income, that's quite significant. But more worryingly, recently, with the pressure on GP practices, is that they are not designated. They are designating this as private work, and some GP practices have point blank refused to do them because they've said we're not doing any private work at the moment because we have to focus on the backlog. And what we're trying to get across to those urges is actually this is safeguarding, and we need families for foster families as well as adoptive families for vulnerable children, and we cannot approve foster carers or adopters without a medical, and this needs to be done. So we are linking in with the ICB, the Integrated Care Board for West Yorkshire, to try and get a steer from them to the GP surgeries that this is essential work that they do need to do. But yeah, it can, that's a small minority of GPs that have taken that position. But for those adopters, they have to move surgery in order to be able to get their medical done.
It's a worrying area, isn't it? I think it's something we need to bring up perhaps through Health and Wellbeing Board and things like that as well. We need a pincer movement on this to try and
helpful
get it done. I think Mike Lodge, perhaps we take a note on that one. Dot, Councillor Foster, and then Helen.
Thank you. Thank you. Just another couple of things that I wanted to mention. 3.4.45 is on page 30, talking about adoption disruption. Now, I'm presuming that is where a child does not remain with their adoptive family for a period or permanently for reasons that presumably are very valid at the time. Is 8 children having adoption disruption to their placements a large proportion? It says it's an increase from last year. Is it a large proportion of adopted children? Is it what was expected? What can you do to reduce that number and the impact on the children? So obviously they're all very small, really, and
Yeah.
they've already had enough trauma in their lives without having an adoption disruption added into the mix. So is it sort of, what are sort of, without going into specifics obviously, but what sort of things cause an adoption disruption, and what can you do to counteract that, if that makes sense? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there are different definitions, I guess, so depending on when it occurs. So there's a disruption prior to adoption order, which is tends to be what we often refer to as a disruption. So sometimes that's during introductions. So the child might have been in those early stages of being introduced to their new family and having all of those sessions where they spend increasing amounts of time together, and then during that stage the family decide or professionals decide that this is not right and shouldn't go ahead. That would be classed as a disruption, and some of those figures will relate to some of those. So that's fairly early on, and as sad as it is, we're often glad to catch it early. And so we wouldn't necessarily see that as an awful thing, because it could have had much more of an impact had that placement gone ahead. At other points, disruption before the adoption order is made. So when children move in with their new families, that's not the end of the process. They need to be there for a period of time and then apply to the court for an adoption order. And until that order is made, they remain a looked after child. So we have disruptions where they break down prior to adoption order, and that again is always very challenging, but there's always a lot of work that goes in. We have disruption meetings in those circumstances, which will be chaired by an independent person, with a lot of social work and adoption experience, where everyone will come together and have a chance to put forward their perspectives. There'll be lots of questions asked, and we'll try to examine what happened, whether there was anything we could have foreseen, anything we could have been done differently, any lessons that we can learn. And we do take those back to our whole agency to share, and we share them with our adoption panels as well, who are making recommendations, so that we can get learning from those. More complicated ones are where they disrupt post order, because we're not always aware. So if we're involved because the placement is really struggling, and then, as after all the support has been put in, it's still not able to continue, and that child comes back into the care system or moves to live with other family members, then we would record that. But we wouldn't necessarily have a disruption meeting for those circumstances, unless we felt there was obviously significant learning to be had here, and we would convene a meeting for that. But many times, particularly in older adolescents, children will go and live with different family members, and families will come to arrangements, or sometimes with friends, and we don't get to know about that. So there's no exact data, and there's no national data. The most comprehensive review we've got is by Julie Selwyn, Beyond the Adoption Order, which was published back in 2016, I think it was, and is a really comprehensive review of all of the research and data into what happens after children are adopted. But nationally, there's no agency that would have exact figures for disruption.
Thank you for that. Can I move on to Helen now?
Yes, please do. And I'll come back from the last one if there's time.
Well, actually, my first question was around the idea of disruption and adoption breakdown, and I think you've answered that very comprehensively. So my other question was, I know time to time, some consultation with foster parents is that they would be interested in moving to adoption, but don't always feel the support will be in place for, and might carry on fostering. And I just wondered, perhaps comment on that, about the level of support may be available post-adoption as compared with fostering, because it would seem in the interest of the child's stability, it would be good if everybody did feel they could progress to fostering, if the support was in place.
Yeah. We have many foster carers who do progress to adoption. We have high numbers of families actually that we are assessing at any one time that are foster carers. So it does happen, and they would have as much support as any adopter, plus sometimes additional financial support that other adopters wouldn't be entitled to. So where you've got a fairly young child, where there's not a huge amount of immediate issues, and we would be very likely to find them an adoptive family elsewhere, and the foster family come forward to adopt. We have an agreement with the 5 local authorities, including Calderdale, that carer will receive up to 2 years financial support on adoption of the child, and they would also be entitled to all the support that any adopter is entitled to. So from us, access to a multidisciplinary team, the Adoption Support Fund, and the Adoption Support Fund, they cannot access while that child is in foster care. That's only for children placed for adoption or adopted, or children on a special guardianship order who were previously looked after. So that support is in place and coming to all of our groups, etc. But they do, in addition, get that 2 years. There are some cases where we've been unsuccessful in being able to find a family for that child, and the foster carer really has come forward to adopt them on the basis that this wasn't their intention, but actually I'd rather them have permanence with me if we can't find it elsewhere. And in those circumstances, there is agreement with the 5 local authorities to pay them the equivalent of their fostering fee and allowance until the child's 18. So there's quite a bit of support available for foster carers.
Yeah, I think, but I'm just concerned that there wasn't almost a perverse incentive people to continue fostering rather than progressing to adoption.
I mean, the thing that happens is because they won't be a looked after child, they won't automatically have a social worker. But from our experience, that's what most foster carers prefer, actually. And one of the motivations for adopting is that child can have a normal family life and not be subject to reviews and social work visits and all of that, that they can step aside from that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to nip in before I come back to Councillor Foster, if I may, at this point. Just a couple of sort of data type things. I was very impressed by the way, Rhiannon, that you were being transparent about the data, providing the data when some of it wasn't not ideal, and recognising that. And that's the first big step, isn't it? Recognising there are things to do in each of those areas. I'm still a bit worried about the sort of staffing side of things in terms of the number of people we've got there who are temporary, and the impact that's had and having, and really, why is it taking so long? What's the issue there? Another data sort of thing, I understand when we're looking at the scorecards, the A1 and the A2 indicators, I understand the A1 situation. The A2, the figures there do sort of shout a bit, don't they, in terms of the time it takes to go from the court authority to matching with an adoptive family. That's a worrying area, and I wondered what sort of actions you feel you can take and how much improvement you can make in those sort of areas. And then there's one that I don't fully understand, which I think is headed compliance audits. And it's number 3454, it says on here, on my little notes. There seem to be all sorts of figures where it says children 1,166, but only 686, adopters 591, but only 211, and support 1068 and only 99, which seems a very small proportion when we've emphasised the importance of the support side of things. So it's some of those data bits, a bit of concern about the staffing side still, and the impact that it might have in terms of the transition from court authority to the adoptive family, and what the compliance audits mean.
Yeah.
Do we need to be concerned about those? Are you concerned about them?
No, I'm not, because the compliance audits are great. Actually, they're really helpful. So this is just making sure that data has been entered correctly in our systems, and right, updated in a timely manner. So for instance, we have trackers for children and for adults. So a child, that should be updated when a link is considered for a child. So we know that we're considering a family. It should be updated when the match is approved. So we know that they've been matched. It should be updated when they're placed. It should be updated when they're adopted. And any delay on that impacts our data reporting. So we have regular monthly compliance audits to look at, to go through with the team managers is this in the right place? Has everything been on? And this is where we've identified anomalies. But actually what we're finding over time is more and more we do this, the better social workers are putting the information on when it needs to go on, and our data is more accurate. But we'll always data cleanse. And
Right.
so it catches up by the next month. So it's not, it doesn't stay outstanding for long.
Good.
So
And the A2 indicator bit?
Yeah, so again, as I said, with the A2 indicator, a lot of this is to do around us being quite brave alongside our local authority partners, being brave in the children that we will consider an adoption plan for. We don't say, oh, that child is 6, and has got complex needs. We're probably not going to be able to find a family for them, so we're not going to try. We do try, but those children do wait longer. And because we have children that wait significantly longer, that does impact then on our timescales from getting the placement order to identify and matching them with the family.
I mean, I have every respect for that viewpoint of placing the hard to place ones, because they're often the ones who need even more than some others. I just thought it was worth checking that area and whether there should be other issues to deal with. Councillor Foster, Dot, you had another question, I think.
Yes, just the one, honestly. Page 46, talking about hard to place children. So I'm just rapidly scrolling down to it because I scrolled up to the bit that Ashley was talking about. So you've got 7 children. I think 7 children have been waiting for at least 18 months since entering care and not yet placed for adoption at the end of March. Has that number changed? And what do you think are the reasons that 4 of the 7 children are not classed as hard to place, but are still struggling to find a family that will adopt them? If that makes sense. I'm just a little bit worried. Is there a particular thing going on there? Is it something that you can address and look at, or is it just happenstance and unfortunate, and you've done everything you can and it's still the same? Does that make sense?
It does. I think the first one, yes, it will have changed because this is data from over 6 months ago, but I don't have the exact up-to-date figures of what it is right now in front of me. The reason that they're not deemed as hard to place, so we have a very specific nationally defined criteria of hard to place children. It's not something that we in One Adoption define, it's defined nationally. And that is children who are over 5, children who are in sibling groups, children of BAME heritage, and children with a disability. But that only includes children with a recognised, identified, diagnosed disability. We have far more children with very complex needs who are presenting very complex behaviours, who don't have that diagnosis and therefore are not classed as hard to place. But in reality, we can struggle to find families for those children. So, and I do know when I was looking at this data, all of those children had quite complex developmental needs where we didn't have a diagnosis.
Right, okay, that makes a lot more sense then, doesn't it? Because in effect, they are hard to place.
They are, but we can't
tick against the box that says that they have a diagnosis. So therefore you can classify them as hard to place, but that's exactly what they are because of those additional needs. Thank you, that makes a lot more sense. I hope that those children that are still sitting in the process find homes that we'll be very happy with soon. Thank you.
Many of them have,
Good.
Good. I've just got one more sort of general observation question before. I thought perhaps Julie Jenkins might want to make any comments and observations. If you don't, Julia, that's absolutely fine, but I thought I would give you the opportunity. My final point is in relation to your action plan, Rhiannon. Very laudable and appropriate targets there, things like increased social media presence, training quality and assessment, post-placement adoption support, and so on. I'm afraid I'm a bit of a sort of hobby horse person in relation to action plans, whereby we need to know where we are, where we're going. How do we get there? What's the process? Are we getting there? Have you got something set down like that? I think perhaps in future, presentation. It might be interesting to see that evolution.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, this is the recruitment strategy. So this is, the broad headlines. Within that, we have our action plan, and we're lucky that we have a full-time project management lead who helps us to pull all this together. So he's much better than I am at drawing up a spreadsheet, putting in targets and dates and what's going to happen when, and making sure that we all get together regularly and meet and check where we are against the targets. So we have a overall service action plan, but under that, I have one for recruitment and assessment, there's one for family finding, there's one for adoption support, and underneath that there's other things. So we have separate working groups for improving the recruitment of Black African Caribbean adopters, for instance, and that has its own targets, and we meet with a select group of people who have an input into that and keep on track of where we are with things. So there are a lot of action plans that sit underneath the recruitment strategy. With all their greens and reds and ambers on them.
Yeah, thank you for that. Julie, did you want to, as I say, make any comments or observations?
Yes, please. If I could, Councillor Evans, thanks very much. Yeah, just to tell and let the members of Children's Scrutiny in Calderdale know that there is a management board that oversees the work of One Adoption West on behalf of the 5 West Yorkshire authorities. So although the service that Rhiannon works for is managed by Leeds City Council on our behalf, we and the elected members also have an oversight of the work that takes place. And I did chair the management board last week, and I did actually write to the directors in the region about what's actually going on in the work of One Adoption West. If you could just allow me, would you mind, Councillor Evans, if I just gave you a quick overview of what I actually put in that email to give an overview of the work? That would be really helpful. Thank you. What I said is, in terms of positives, we've actually got a peer mentoring scheme in place that's really successful now. So this is around adopters who've successfully adopted, actually helping other adopters, and it's 100% positively evaluated. And this was an idea we had right at the creation of the adoption agency. So it's really good to see that coming into being and giving really well received adoption support to our adopters in the region. And as Rhiannon said tonight, the number of adopters coming through is increasing, and we do have a focus, the agency does, on recruiting Black and Asian and different background families for our children. We've got a lot of profiling events where we're quite good at matching When Adoption West are the families that we've got available with the children that are coming through. There haven't been any disruptions this year in the whole of the agency, which is amazing. And we also have a new dedicated contact worker in place who is renegotiating the adoption contact agreements between natural families and adoptive families, because I think you can imagine with the changes in social media, it's much more easier to trace your natural family. Things are very different to how it used to be. We're also looking at some really good life story work that's been done in East Riding, and actually rolling that out in the region. And face-to-face training is back in place. I thought this was really important after COVID, that people want to see each other and actually get that face-to-face input and training. So that's back in place too. The issues that I picked up in relation, to having some improvement are really around some of the factors a little bit outside One Adoption West control. One is making sure the financial support's there around the health elements for the multidisciplinary team. And the other one, just to note, is there are some delays in the courts in making adoption orders. And what this means is there's delay for our children that's no fault of the agency or our social work teams. So we have a regular meeting with the courts, and the senior judge who's in charge of the West Yorkshire courts. We have a regular dialogue with them. So we'll be raising this with them. And this is a backlog issue, again, with court time and availability. So, it isn't down on anybody within the West Yorkshire areas or One Adoption West, but it is an issue that we are aware of and we are tackling. So, overall, I was pretty impressed, I must say, with what Rhiannon and Michelle Rawlings and everybody's doing. They are really operating at a very high level in terms of innovation, the quality of the work, and the outcomes for our children. So I was pretty impressed, which is why I wrote to all the directors in West Yorkshire to give them that feedback. So thanks very much, Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Julie. Can't see any other hands up on this issue. Shall we move on to the next item. So just to thank Rhiannon for that very detailed presentation and putting up with our awkward questions or confused thoughts and so on. And thank you for that. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. So item 6 on our agenda is the annual report in relation to complaints and it says complaints and representations on my little note, but I think there's also some compliments which have been paid as well, which we need to talk to. And I think that Tony Kershaw, you're going to do the presentation on this one. Is that correct?
No, it's actually Richard Noble, who's our complaints manager.
Also got note again as well. So
Richard's going to give you the headlines from the report, and I'll cover anything that you want to know from the service perspective, and Richard will do the complaint side of things. Councillor Evans, thank you.
Thank you. So away you go then, Richard. My apologies.
No problem. Thank you. Good evening. So I've produced the latest report for the 21-22, which has all been shared. And obviously, I believe it's a positive report. It covers a period when we was all recovering from the pandemic. And as such, complaints were low across the council in general. It's worth noting that due to the low amount of complaints that we've received, that this doesn't have a bearing on our accessibility for people to complain. It's based on current contact. The service are receiving a higher amount of contacts, complaints and concerns. So the low level in this report, I don't feel justifies what's going on. In addition to the low number of complaints, there's an excellent level of compliments that have been received across the service. This is an excellent reflection on the service delivery that was conducted during this reporting period. And from a complaints perspective, we have a close working relationship with the service, so we can work to resolve complaints and technically avoid a very lengthy complaint process. Like I said, there is only 4 complaints applicable to the statutory procedure. So we're open to any questions.
Good, fair enough. Thank you for that. Any particular questions or observations that members of the board would wish to make? I think you might have stunned them into silence, Richard.
It is pretty unusual, Councillor Evans, to have this low number of complaints.
Indeed.
But Richard has done an awful lot of work and training, and we do a lot of early resolution and kind of trying to deal with complaints at the earliest level and actually ask what are people looking for as an outcome. So Richard's done a lot of work with the assistant director that was in post that you'll remember from Scrutiny, Rob Murray. And I think it's 2 factors. One is kind of getting in there early. I think the other issue is this was during COVID, and because it was such an unusual period of lockdown, most people, children, unless you were vulnerable or the child of a key worker, you weren't in school, families really hunkered down. Social workers, youth workers, and all of the services were doing everything they could to support young people best as they could and safely in the open air, etc. And I think it was just a very unusual period. So we don't usually see this low level number, as you'll see looking back at previous years. But I think there's a couple of things, unique factors, if you like, about this report. But it is a great news story because of the number of compliments there are. And I've got to say, they do keep coming in, which is lovely to see. So people are very complimentary about some of the work that's happening in the service as well. So I think there's a hand now, so we can take some questions.
Yeah, indeed. So, Councillor Foster-Dott, you've got your hand up. It's the first time I've...
It's only a brief one. I just wanted to say how amazing it is to see the number of compliments that have come in. And obviously that all those are shared, and there's a snapshot of some of those in the report. I'd be interested to know sort of whether there's any sort of pattern to the compliments, and whether there's any I mean, it's wonderful that we're getting so many, but whether there's any particular service that routinely gets way more compliments than anybody else, or that sort of thing. Just interested to know a little bit more around the detail of the patterns within the compliments. But yeah, overall, it's wonderful to see so many of them. Thank you.
I think that's a very appropriate comment there, Dot. I would just say, for one so young, I tend to be a little bit cynical about things. I'm not sure whether you're laughing about the cynicism or the one so young there. But,
the cynicism, Councillor.
That was a before. It just strikes me that because we're dealing here with a very wide service, a large number of users, and to actually only get 4 complaints, that's very positive. Clearly it is. But are we missing something? And I'm not trying to be nasty or awkward or whatever, but are we missing some things here? Do we gather sufficient information? What actually is a complaint? And there's also some reference to ombudsman as well. Is in a different scale. So
yeah,
a bit of feedback on that.
Yeah. I'll ask Richard to come in about, I think, yeah, Richard is there. I just wonder whether he's frozen. I'll ask Richard to come in. Oh, he keeps dropping his connection. I'll ask Richard to come in about the ombudsman complaints. He's got a bit of information for you about that he can share. I think you're raising a really good point, Councillor Evans, around the different types and levels of complaints and queries, because Richard and I discussed this today, because running alongside the formal complaint, the Children Act complaint process, that's very prescriptive. It's stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 to ombudsman. I receive probably on nearly a daily basis what I would call queries, concerns that don't go down the formal complaints route.
Indeed.
And often they'll come in from the caseworkers, from our local MPs, and Councillor Foster will be able to tell you about this, because she is one of the people who contacts me regularly with kind of questions and queries. I'm pretty clear when they come into my office. If it's a complaint and it's a formal complaint and it's serious, it just goes straight to the complaints team, because it must be dealt with through that route. So I'll just give you an example. We had a parent that contacted us, very concerned about what was happening in terms of some plans for a daughter. Quite serious concerns. It went straight to Richard's team. This has happened recently. But on top of that, then we got a further query from the MP's office, just asking about some specific issues that are happening for that young person that weekend. Now, we could quickly answer that as a query. So it didn't go to Richard's team because it would just take too long. It goes into a formal process. And as you know, it takes days to respond, a couple of weeks to respond. So there's always running alongside. I call it my kind of query tracker. And I look at this every week in my management meeting. So my business executive, my PA, if you like, she gets all of these in regularly. They come in every day, they go out to the service, and what we try and do is answer them pretty quickly, pretty positively, really trying to understand what's going on. And they could be about anything to do with any parts of the service. So I suppose in some ways it's not a hidden part of the work, but it's more of an early help, prevention, intervention, answering quick queries, rather than going into very expensive, timely, it takes time, and it's stressful for people going through a formal complaints process. They usually feel pretty aggrieved. They may need support themselves. So we've got 2 things running there, and Richard and I talked about this morning. And making sure that relationship with the MP's offices, and we get things from yourselves as ward members, as you know, and we really try and deal with those as quickly as we can. If you contact me, any of you, any councillor with a query or a worry or a concern, we will get you a response back, but hopefully within the matter of days, not weeks. So I think it's just to assure you that those keep flowing in regularly. That I think people know where to go. I think the complaints team for the council is pretty well known because it's on the council website. I think families who are, they use the appropriate channels, and there are lots of other places to go as well. And clearly, the education landscape has got its own complaint procedure as well, within individual schools, governing bodies, through to the DFE. So this is just a snapshot really of council services. So I would say there's a lot more going on, and I think probably Councillor Foster could probably add to what I've said, if you wanted to hear more about that.
I'd be interested, because I think maybe it's a misinterpretation on my part, or it may even be true of other members of this board, that when we think of complaints, we don't necessarily just complaints, but queries, observations, grumbles, whatever you want to call it. And I suppose part of that process is knowing what it will do is it will highlight possibly areas that we should be informing people better about, communicating with them a little bit better, and so on. And is there are there any themes which come up in that sort of area? And I certainly would be interested to know what those things are beyond the more formal side of things. But yes, I'd be interested to hear what Dot has to say on this. Do you want to come in on that one? Then I'll go to Helen. I've just seen you come up.
Yes, sure. I mean, we get all sorts of stuff into the MP's office at absolutely anything and everything, from the case that Julie described just now to somebody complaining there's weeds in the pavement, that street light's too bright, you name it, it comes in via the MP's office. And probably half of it shouldn't come anywhere near the MP's office, but it does, because, you know, we're an easy target. But we tend to sort of take a very proactive approach. We rarely send anything directly to Richard as a complaint, because quite often we're very much a fact-finding office. So we're sort of looking to, rather than sort of take sides in an argument, if you like, we're looking very much to establish, okay, so the parent has said this, what exactly is going on with this situation? Julie, can you shed any light on it, please? Can any of our team shed any light? We frequently write to Paul Tinsley about education inclusion matters, and other members of the team too. So ours is very much a fact-finding mission initially, and then we take that information away, feed it back to the parent, and then, you know, sort of take it from there depending on what their response is. You know, some stuff is sort of fairly easily resolved, some really isn't. The case that Julie was talking about, I think, is one has been going on for quite some time and is unlikely to be swiftly resolved, but certainly needs, you know, sort of, I think the parent is likely to come back to us, having got the response from Julie that I think I've sent out to her today. So, you know, I almost certainly will get more correspondence on that one, and we'll manage that as we go along. But it's a really, you know, it's always really helpful to know that we can write directly to Julie and her team, and, you know, sort of ask for information about whatever it is that's been raised, and we will do that, you know, as often as we need to. And there can be quite a back and forth trail of correspondence sometimes. But what is always really helpful is when Julie writes on the emails, please share this bit with the constituent, please do not share this bit with the constituent, because then it's very clear to us where the line needs to be drawn. And that is an approach that, you know, it needs to be taken when some very sensitive information is being shared. But yeah, it's a really interesting side of things. So yeah, hope that was.
Riveron, Helen, you put your hand up as well, and then I'll come on to Danielle.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just a point I've actually raised loads of times over the years, and I've probably rather given up mentioning. I will begin by saying it's great to have so many compliments, because what I'm actually going to have to say, again, might sound rather cynical. The title of the report is Complaints and Compliments Received. It isn't complaints that have gone down the formal process to be addressed by Richard's team. And if I was picking up this report, I would think 4 was the sum total of complaints that have been received. And that is a sort of threat that does generate a degree of cynicism. I've had more complaints than that probably in the last few weeks. So, you know, it isn't the whole number of people complaining. Now, maybe it wouldn't be possible to report on that. But the other thing I would say is complaints in an organisation this size, looking at the level of difficult and complex things we deal with, it's not a bad thing to be getting complaints. That shows people are actually responding. They feel able to communicate and they expect to have a response. So actually, in some ways, we should be not welcoming complaints in terms of getting things wrong, but showing we are listening. We know no organisation this size is going to get it right every time. and that we're listening and responding and we'll try and address things. So I think I would like to suggest, great, we've got the compliments, yes, but is there something bit more, perhaps a little bit more useful and illuminating we can have about the things people do representations to us that won't necessarily go to the formal complaints process?
Thank you for that, Helen. That's exactly my thought. You put it much more succinctly than I did.
Can I come in on this as well?
Please do
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear in Richard's report when you read it. This is around children's social care. And as I said, that is one element of the service. So this is around children at complaints with those stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. So there will be other complaints that come in and dealt with in other ways as well. So I'm sure Richard can pick that up, as well as the Ombudsman issue, Councillor Evans, when he comes in a minute. But yeah, happy to take a few more questions first.
Good, thank you for that. Appreciate it. Danielle, Councillor Dorrans.
Thanks, Chair. Similar really to what Helen said around the value of what feedback means and how the information around that is used, whether it is seen as a formal complaint or just constructive around improving services. Clearly, in regards to the compliments, something's going right somewhere, and whether that can be reflective on the bits that are potentially not going as well. And then just another question that I may have missed something, but in regards to the complaints, 21, 22, there's 4, but across to the Ombudsman, there's 6. So there's 2 missing somewhere, or have I misunderstood something?
I think it would be good to get Richard to answer that and the general Ombudsman query on my part as well. Anything else?
No, that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Richard, do you want to respond to this element of it, please?
So the Ombudsman was 3 complaints that actually went to the Ombudsman during this period. One of the 3 complaints, one was, I believe, 2.6, aren't we? One was refused to be investigated, and that was closed at the initial stage, and 2 are currently awaiting investigation by the Ombudsman. So there was only 3 actual complaints during this period.
And why do things go to the Ombudsman, or when and how do they go there, rather than just to yourself, with all due respect?
So if a complaint went direct to the Ombudsman, in my role, I'm the link between Calderdale and the Ombudsman. So the Ombudsman, before they can investigate, they need us to have concluded our complaints process before they're obliged to look into something. So initially what they'll do is they'll check if we've concluded our complaints procedure for the relevant service area. And then what they'll do is they'll like triage complaints, and then they pick out the ones where they feel that they've got a right. Their kind of terms is spending public money to investigate complaints. So then they'll pick out where they think they might have been fault by the council, and then conduct their investigations. So in order for them to look into them, the one that they withdrew, they looked at that and decided that they didn't have a case to look into. So they closed it at the initial contact point. I mean, just as a quick overview, council-wide, the latest Ombudsman figures for the same reporting period, they were on a report that went to Business and Governance Committee, and we had 72 contacts were made to the Ombudsman during 21-22.
Yep.
Of them 72, they investigated 18. So the other remaining complaints, they decided that there were no case to investigate, or it hadn't concluded our procedure. And then from them 18 complaints, 11 is where they found some fault. So we had an overall upheld rate of, I believe it was 65%, which was below the national average for a council our size. So I think if we look at the figures, 11 upheld from 72 leave is bad figures.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I put that in the context as well as Julie's comment that we are talking about CYP here, aren't we? Rather than
yeah. That was the council as a whole.
Yeah.
General councillors, we're tending to think broader than the specific agenda item here as well. So I take that on board. But I would still be interested in thinking about these other areas that Helen and I think Danielle brought up. I'd be interested in looking at that, and perhaps I'll have a chat with Scrutiny support officers on that as a possible subject for future. But I accept your comments at this stage for sure. Thank you. Any other comments on this item? Can't see any more hands. So thank you, Richard. Sorry for my confusion in the first place, getting the wrong person, and also for homing in on a broader spectrum than was necessary for this particular agenda item. But thank you, Julie, as well, for putting us right on that one. Final item on this evening's agenda is the work programme. Mike, Bella, are you wanting to lead on this one?
That'll be me, Chair. Just first of all to say that you will remember that you were appointed to a joint working party with Adults Health and Social Care Scrutiny Board at your last meeting, I think, looking at the report from the Equal Cares organisation called Buying Our Care. That's just to report that working party has been established. It's met once to plan its work and has a first meeting on Friday morning where Kath Gamali, the Director of Adults and Wellbeing, is going to give that working party a detailed briefing on the legislation in the context of some of the issues raised in that report. So that piece of work is underway and plans to report back to the Adults Health and Social Care Scrutiny Board in February, and Councillor Evans is the chair of that working party. So you have good representation on that working party as well.
Thank you. Helen's got her hand up. Is it this particular context?
Co-chair. It is about evening the issue that I did email you about, and that was about having additional scrutiny day to look at the issue of domestic violence. We had a working party on this just over 2 years ago. It was led by communities, but there's major significance for children and young people, I think, clearly as well. At the last Safer, Cleaner, Greener meeting I was at, we were given crime figures. We were told there was an increase in violent crime, and this was largely driven by an increase in domestic violence. I do think, given the seriousness of that, perhaps ourselves and communities ought to look at a follow-up scrutiny. I've suggested maybe a scrutiny a day. I think the important thing is we get a range of agencies together so we get a clear picture of what's happening, what's driving that, and any way we can usefully respond. I do appreciate, obviously, that programmes are, busy and workloads are high, but I would suggest this is sufficient importance that scrutiny should have another look at this.
Would you like to look into that for us, Mike? And sorry to have butt in, but it seemed appropriate to bring Helen in.
No, it's an important issue, and we are actually looking into it. And it was actually reported at the end of 2019, so that's quite a while ago. It's those of you that remember Steve Barnbrook, he worked on that report. It went to Cabinet, and Cabinet made a decision to report back, and I haven't been able to track the report back down yet. So it may be that we got hit with a pandemic. That report back went into a lower priority, which you can understand in terms of reporting back, not in terms of the issue. But we are picking up on the issue that Councillor Riveron has emailed about, and I'm sure it will result in some follow-up work on that issue. Whether it's done in place scrutiny board or here or a joint working party,
we can think about that.
What's the most effective way, really? I don't.
Yeah.
Does it?
It certainly isn't lost. The other things I was just going to mention briefly is that I have a meeting tomorrow morning with Ben Lehman and Rachel Smith about the item on with Councillor Evans and Councillor Tremaine about the item on starting well that's on your December agenda. And the other two items, I think Julie will confirm, I think, are in place and ready to come. The other thing just to report is I've also got a meeting set up. As many of you will probably know, we've Chris Forrester, the head of finance, has got a new role, so he'll be leaving us shortly. And I'm meeting with the interim head of finance in a couple of weeks' time to talk about the way in which budget issues and cabinet budget proposals are handled through scrutiny at your January meeting. So just that's to talk about the preparatory work. And Councillor Evans and Councillor Tremaine are meeting with Julie and Councillor Wilkinson and Julie's management team tomorrow lunchtime, which will probably be an opportunity to pick on some of the issues that are outstanding from the discussions this evening.
Indeed. Julie, you wanted to come in on that one, was it, or something else?
I just wanted to pick up on the domestic abuse issue, Councillor Evans, if that's okay. I chair the strategic board for the borough. It's the co-chairs, Mick Brown, who you've met before, Superintendent Mick Brown from the police. We've had quite a big needs assessment piece of work done, led externally by some experts in the field. And there's a huge needs assessment there that we've taken to the Community Safety Partnership. So there is a lot of background here around where we're at, what we need to do next. And we have had some money funding through from the Department of Housing and Local Government, DLUC for short, for some additional housing. So I think to do a scrutiny in a day would really bring you up to speed with all of that work. I think the Community Safety Partnership are pretty much up to speed with some of this. But I think, you know, from a children's perspective as well, I think it'd be really good. I think it'd be a really good thing for you to look at. There's been significant change since 2019.
Good, thank you for that. I'll look forward to our discussion tomorrow. Mike, anything further on the programme?
No, Chair.
Okay, that's good. So thank you one and all. Just to raise a point, I don't know whether all you've seen on the chat there that Dot has congratulated Will on his speech at the Youth Parliament. So I think I would second that. Well done, and some useful contributions.
Yeah.
Will.
Well done,
Councillor.
Good stuff. So thank you one and all this evening. Look forward to seeing you next time, and we'll discuss and develop some of these ideas which have been raised today. Thank you very much, and good night to you.
Add out another compliment on our chair.
Good night, everybody. Take care.
Evening, everyone.
See you soon. Bye.